I've never agreed with psychiatry, ever. Psychiatry is a pseudoscience.
But Tom, if she said that this particular thing helped her feel better, whether it was the antidepressant or going to a counselor or a psychiatrist, isn't that enough?
Matt, you have to understand this. Here we are today, where I talk out against drugs. Do you know what Adderall is? Do you know Ritalin? Do you know now that Ritalin is a street drug? Do you understand that?
The difference is, this was not
Matt,
against her will, though. But this wasn't against Brooke's will.
Matt, I'm asking you a question.
I understand there's abuse of all of these things.
No, you see, here's the problem. You don't know the history of psychiatry. I do.
Aren't there examples, and might not Brooke Shields be an example of someone who benefited from one of those drugs?
All it does is mask the problem, Matt. And if you understand the history of it, it masks the problem. That's what it does. That's all it does. You're not getting to the reason why. There is no such thing as a chemical imbalance.
So postpartum depression to you is
Matt,
kind of a little psychological gobbledygook?
No, I did not say that.
I'm just asking, what would you call it?
Matt, that is the now you're talking about two different things.
But that's what she went on the antidepressant for.
But what happens, the antidepressant, all it does is mask the problem. There's ways of vitamins and through exercise and various things. I'm not saying that that isn't real. That's not what I'm saying. That's an alteration of what I'm saying. I'm saying that drugs aren't the answer, that these drugs are very dangerous. They're mind-altering, antipsychotic drugs. And there are ways of doing it without that so that we don't end up in a brave new world.
Controversy over a new depression study. You may have seen a wave of headlines this week saying that a new study shows basically everything we thought we knew about depression isn't true. And you've probably heard this before, that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, specifically serotonin. It's on this premise that the majority of antidepressants are based, which represent a more than $11 billion global market. More than 37 million Americans take antidepressants, most of them SSRIs, which work to correct the balance of serotonin. So this newspaper summarizes that there is in fact no hard evidence to support that depression is caused by a disturbance of the brain's serotonin.
This seems to me like a landmark set of results, that this could be a total game changer in the way that we tackle depression in this country.
So there's been an idea around for a long time that actually the evidence about serotonin doesn't stack up, that there are studies out there that are negative or inconclusive, but no one before has got all the research together and looked at it in total and found that not one single area of research on serotonin, at least the main areas, really provides any convincing evidence that depression is associated with low serotonin levels.
But then, what is depression associated? What causes it? And I mean, we're talking about a debilitating condition, and we're going to come to... So what is causing the problem?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. Of course, there's research going on into lots of other possible biological causes and has been for decades, but none of them have come up with any more convincing evidence than the evidence on serotonin. The evidence on serotonin is one of the areas that's been most thoroughly researched over the last few decades. So my interpretation of this research is that we need to look at depression differently. We need to stop seeing it as a brain disorder.
And I think it's been extraordinary because, you know, this has been such a prevalent idea for so many years, and we've shown that actually it's not supported by the evidence. But not only that, people haven't been told, even though many people in the psychiatric community have known that the serotonin theory is pretty shaky for a long time. The public have not been told that. And so I think it's caused some embarrassment for the psychiatric community.
And the worry is that if antidepressants aren't doing what we thought they were doing, are they really doing more good than harm? What are they doing to the brain? And might that be harmful?
Yeah, look, we're so lucky to have you in here talking to us about this today. Your research being reported in all of the papers this morning, and as we say, an absolute game changer, all that you've done.
So that then raises the question of, if antidepressants aren't correcting an underlying abnormality of serotonin, what are they doing exactly? And we know that they are, modifying brain chemicals in some way, but we don't know that they're correcting an abnormality. So that should make us ask, these are drugs, they're changing the state of the brain, and and that might make us think a little bit more carefully, I think, about what they might be doing to us, particularly if we take them for long periods of time, and urge us, I think, to be more cautious about using them.
Interesting.
Well, our study isn't directly about what antidepressants do, but I think it's important for people to know that the evidence base for antidepressants, it consists of randomized controlled trials that compare antidepressants against a placebo pill. And those trials show that the difference between an antidepressant and a placebo is very small. And they also show that the majority of the response that happens, the majority of improvement that happens in those trials occurs in people who are on the placebo as well as on the antidepressant. So they show that the majority of the effect of an antidepressant is a placebo effect. So that's partly why many people feel better when they're on an antidepressant.
There are a range of different psychosocial therapy approaches that people also try, and some of those are incredibly effective with or without the use of any drugs.
And finally, doctor, what's the next step based on this research in terms of being able to treat depression, or the conversation that clinicians might have with people who are facing depression?
Well, look, 1 out of 5 young women before the age of 25 is experiencing a major depressive episode. 1 out of 10 young men. So this is something we clearly need a lot more research on so we can develop effective treatments that can reach everybody and will catch all the different forms of depression, since it seems now very clear that there's a whole bunch of different ways that people might get depressed.
So this paper is showing that if there's no association between depression and serotonin, that justification for using antidepressants isn't there. In other words, we really don't have evidence that they are rectifying an underlying abnormality.
But Professor, you know as well as I know that people will look for a crutch, they will look for a mask, something to just put a buffer between them and what they're going through. And if a tablet is now not going to do that, where do they go? What do they do?
So I think that's a really good question, and I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. I think, depression is different in everyone that has it, and that's because the causes of depression are different in everyone that has it. And the first thing is to tackle the causes, is to address why someone is depressed. And there are lots of things about modern society that make people susceptible to depression. We live in very stressful times, huge cost of living crisis, so many people in debt, loneliness rife. So those are some of the main things.
Watching the news and think the world's coming to an end.
Well, if antidepressants work for Brooke Shields, why isn't that okay?
I disagree with it. And I think that there's a higher and better quality of life. And I think that promoting, for me personally, see, you're saying, I can't discuss what I want to discuss?
No, you absolutely can.
But Matt, you're going in and saying that I can't discuss that.
I'm only asking, isn't there a possibility that, do you examine the possibility that these things do work for some people? Aren't there examples where it works?
Matt, you're glib. You don't even know what Ritalin is. If you start talking about chemical imbalance, you have to evaluate and read the research papers on how they came up with these theories, Matt. Okay, that's what I've done. And you go and you say, where's the medical test? Where's the blood test that says how much Ritalin you're supposed to get?
It's very impressive to listen to you, because clearly you've done the homework and you know the subject.
And you should. And you should do that also, because just knowing people who are on Ritalin isn't enough. You should be a little bit more responsible in knowing
I'm not prescribing Ritalin, Tom, and I'm not asking anyone else to do it.
Well, you're saying no.
I know some people who seem to have been helped by it.
But it's like, this is a very important issue.
I couldn't agree more.
And you know what? And you're here on the Today Show,
right?
And to talk about it in a way of saying, well, isn't it okay, and being reasonable about it when you don't know, and I do. I think that you should be a little bit more responsible in knowing what it is, because you communicate to people.
But you're now telling me that your experiences with the people I know, which are zero, are more important than my experiences.
What do you mean by that?
You're telling me what's worked for people I know, or hasn't worked for people I know, and I'm telling you I've lived with these people, and they're better.
So you're advocating it?
I am not. I'm telling you, in their case, in their individual case, it worked. I am not going to go out
Matt-
and say, get your kids on Ritalin, it's the cure-all
Matt,
and the end-all.
Matt, but here's the point. What is an ideal scene in life?